when my brother-in-law handed me Rich Dad Poor Dad and said, you have to read this book. It was the first time in my early 20s that I'd ever heard of those terms of passive income and entrepreneurship, especially social media is all about how big, how many doors have you acquired? And honestly, it really doesn't mean anything.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Calculated Interest. On today's episode, we are meeting with Liz Faircloth. She's a real estate investor, co-founder of the InvestHER community, which has helped like 50,000 plus women globally. She's the co-host of the InvestHER podcast, author, and just all around amazing person. We spoke about so many things. We talked about how intention in investing, it can be the key, women in real estate, the massive transfer of wealth that's happening, and how community and mentorship is just so important. If you're looking for your next bit of inspiration, or you're already investing and want to just learn more, this is a great episode for you. So let's get into it.
Calculated Interest is powered by asset-based lending. Each episode, we sit down with investors and industry experts to break down what is actually happening in today's market and how smart investors are adapting. You've probably seen asset-based lending in places like Scotsman Guide, Housing Wire, and National Mortgage Professional. We've been doing this for over 15 years and have funded thousands of projects along the way. Let's get into today's conversation.
All right. Well, welcome, Liz. Thank you so much for coming onto our show. We're so excited to have
Yes.
you.
Thank you for having me, Alyssa. Appreciate the opportunity. Excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, I have a ton of questions to ask you, so I don't know. Let's just dive right in. So, interested in hearing what drew you to real estate investing, and what that early period looked like for you.
So yeah, what originally drew me into real estate was my brother-in-law. He handed me Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was actually going to school to get my master's degree in social work. So my dream was to become a therapist. That was my focus. And right around the time of my second year in getting my master's, that was when my brother-in-law handed me Rich Dad Poor Dad and said, you have to read this book. And I'm like, what is this little purple book? And when I read it, it was the first time in my early 20s that I'd ever heard of those terms of passive income and entrepreneurship, and real estate investing, having money work for you versus you working for money, all the concepts that that book really dives into. And so that was really like this awakening for me. And I say that in a very, not in a weird way, but in a really powerful way. And one of the things that it speaks about in that book was that if you want to become an investor, own property, have money work for you, you need to learn how to sell. So here I am going to get my degree in social work, right? And that's like the furthest thing from learning how to sell. So I actually decided not to become a therapist or get a kind of a job in quote unquote social work. I ended up getting a sales position right out of graduate school in a small consulting firm in New Jersey that basically I sold a personality assessment to help companies get better staff in the sense of like better people in the right fit, for the right job type of approach, team building, more like management consulting. So that book not only helped me invest in real estate, but it really helped me with my next step, which was getting a sales position. And around the same time I got my first position in this sales position, we bought our first property. So we took about a year of classes and got a loan from my father of about 30,000, and we bought our first duplex in Roxborough, which is a little town outside of Philadelphia. So it really changed this trajectory of my life in a very meaningful way and a very impactful way.
Wow, that's awesome. And you know, in preparation for that first property,
Yeah.
when you think back of like how you prepared for that deal and now how you look at deals, what did you learn through that journey? Or, do you have any advice that you've kind of could share with the?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much I've learned. I've been doing this for 20 years, right? So I hope I don't look at properties the same way I did when we started. I do think there's this energy of hustle that when you're looking for your first property, you have. And I don't I think there's a lot of value to that. What I mean by that is we went door knocking. I mean, we went door knocking, like literally door to door, to source properties. We kind of did whatever it took to source our first property. And I'm grateful for that. We actually called a for rent ad, said, vacancy. And we're like, oh, that's a strategy. So if an owner has a vacancy that might be frustrated, especially if it's a duplex, right? It means like half your property is vacant, which is not good for cash flow. So that was one of the first strategies we learned. And we cold called this owner and said, we don't want to rent from you, but we'd love to buy your property possibly. And then we started talking to him, and that was how we found our first property. So, when I look back, I think we put the deal in front of the market. I knew the market. We knew of the market. We knew the general parts of Roxborough being kind of like a subset of Philadelphia. But I wouldn't say I valued the market over the property, if that makes sense. It was much more of like, what's going to be our first rental? And that became our obsession. Now, I put the market so much more ahead of the property. You can change a property. You can even go to zoning and change a commercial property to a residential, or vice versa. You can't change a market by yourself. You just can't. You can affect change, but you can't change it yourself. So what I place my value in, market versus the property itself, has completely flipped, where I'm much more obsessed with the market than the property itself. And I don't think I had that same intellect or that same kind of, thinking when I first started. It was the opposite.
That makes sense. And I guess like, thinking about I think many people have like a fear to kind of jump into this, and you took I don't know if it felt like a risk to you at all, but it might feel like a risk to some to jump into it. Do you feel like because you were like obsessed and so excited, the motivation made that risk easy, or was it difficult and you just had to overcome it?
I think I was so naive. I was in my 20s. My husband was in his 20s. We had this like glossy colored view of the world. 20 years later, I'm more cautious. I'm more careful. I take risks. They're much more like mindful and intentional and not blind. I think because of my naivety, if you will, I think that added to me just jumping in, and my personality. Same with my husband, um, which has been a blessing in some ways. In other ways, you can say, okay, I can see where that got me into trouble, right? I didn't do the enough due diligence on someone or something. But I do think it was is part youth, part excitement, part we'll figure it out type of, which I still have in me, right? I still just will figure something out. That is just who that's in my DNA. However, I'm much more calculated and thoughtful about something versus just jumping in a little bit more blindly. I would hope I don't do that anymore. Um, Not that I don't take risk, but I don't take risks the way I used to. And I think I was just naive, to be honest. Um, Partly age, partly just lack of knowledge, right? That's the only thing you can call that is naive. And I'm grateful for it because it got us going. But like in hindsight, right? Would I do that now in that way? No, I would do it differently. I'd still would, we're still buying properties, right? We're still doing deals. I'm doing one of my largest projects to date here in my community that I live in, but I feel like it's more calculated. It's not I didn't jump in blindly.
That's fair. And it makes sense. And honestly, like we could also thank your younger self for having that naivety because, you never know. You never know.
Correct. I mean, and you do have to, I do see it in this business a lot, Alyssa, where I think people overthink and they end up doing nothing.
Right.
So I am grateful. I am grateful for that, for taking action, right? And everything. So those are all positives. And then you just want to do it smartly, right? And you want to do it with more intentionality, um, and get better at it, right? That's the goal. So, but yeah, I mean, that is something that I see people getting stopped, and it's, a lack of making a decision is not going to get you any further, right? It just gets you kind of where you already are.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, definitely. So I guess fast forwarding a little bit, so you know, there must have been a pivotal point that you made the decision with your partner to move into the InvestHER space. And I'm just curious about, was there like a big aha moment or a shift that occurred that prompted it?
Yeah. I always like to say there was like there was something internally happening within both of us, and then there was something external. So I'll start with the internal. So right around that time, I had my first kiddo. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old now, but it's right around the time I had my 12-year-old. And at that time, I had moved away from my consulting job, the one I had shared it with you. I was with my previous boss for over a decade, helping her build her business while I was helping build our portfolio. And we had built our portfolio, our rentals, to the point where I could step away from the work I was doing, while I had my first kiddo. So on paper, everything was really like great, Alyssa. I could finally walk away from my consulting job. I can be home initially with my son. I can help my husband grow our portfolio full time once my little one started to become a little one after he was born. And honestly, something was really missing for me. I felt really empty. I felt really like I didn't know where the meaning was in my life. I felt a little like just disjointed, if that makes sense. Like on paper, I had everything going, but internally, I was like, is this it? Is this what I've been working towards? Because something felt like it was missing. And it was around the same time I met my now business partner, Andressa. She was going through a divorce. So we were both going through really like intense moments of our lives. And as we connected and we were friends before that, we started a mastermind where we supported women, nationally. And it was before InvestHER. We started supporting women to get come together once a month. What's coming up for you? How are things going in your business? What support that you need? And we became this like kind of like neat little mastermind group. And we formed it to support ourselves because of the different things we were going through, but also support these women that we knew, liked, and trusted that were also building real estate portfolios. And so what kind of came out of all this was that we really wanted to have more meaning and purpose, not just for ourselves, but for the women that we were interacting with. And we knew there were other women that also wanted to surround themselves with like minded women that were investing in real estate, but they just didn't know where to find these people. They didn't know where to find these women. And externally, we'd go to events, we'd go to conferences, we go to you name it. And we felt like we are the only women there. We didn't see a lot of women speaking. We didn't see a lot of women keynoting. We didn't see a lot of women being highlighted, especially when it came to, uh, raising capital, construction, putting deals together, those sort of topics. So there was a miss externally. We couldn't find what we wanted. And internally, we both were going through these moments of like, how do we create more meaning and purpose for ourselves and for our lives? And real estate's a great asset class, but it also InvestHER has been a very mission oriented company that we're really creating space and financial freedom for women on their own terms, the way it works for them, and creating a community to do that has become was very meaningful to both of us. So that I it both was a need, but it also, really was a way for us to serve and to be in purpose. Life's short, right? And we want to be part of things that actually are making a difference. And so that's kind of the story behind Investor.
That's incredible, and I honestly couldn't relate more. And I think like almost, most people in my life, it's like you either make an intentional decision to dedicate your life to something, or you are end up dedicating to your life to something else that's without your choice. It's
Right.
amazing that you recognize that and then built such an incredible thing that helps so many people. Um, that's awesome. So, there's profiles of women I think a lot of your listeners will recognize. Someone with a successful career or business who makes very deliberate pivots into real estate.
Yeah.
What do you feel like they tend to get wrong when they first show up in the space?
So what's interesting, right? Because we have different types of women in our community, right? We have women, like you said, they're and I'm just going to think of a couple of our members in particular. They're running a successful business, they have a successful career, or they're running a successful home, right? And women could be stay at home moms to to an entrepreneur. Really, we have women all those stages. And then they're like, hold on, I want to create more freedom, financial freedom and time freedom. That's a very big need for a lot of people. You could poll just 10 random people and say, do you want time freedom and do you want financial freedom? There's not many that are going to be like, you know what? I don't want time freedom. I don't want financial freedom, right? It's something that most people would probably agree to, right? We all could agree to that. So, real estate investing and creating a business for yourself or a portfolio is one way. There's a lot of ways. One way to do that, right? And so we have women that come to us or are within our community, especially within our mentorship program. I'm thinking of one in particular has built a very successful franchise business, and she has over 40 employees, and she's fixing and flipping properties on the side, and she really wants to grow that, and eventually let go of her kind of core business. That's a very common woman that we see, and what's always the biggest, I think, the biggest mistake is that women undersell themselves. Women like dim their light. I don't know how else to say it except that. And what I mean by that is, and now I'm thinking about this one particular woman. I mean, she's like a badass woman. When I say badass, like you talk to her, she's funny, she's direct. She built up a very successful company. Um, and then she starts talking about some of her fix and flips. And you can see her demeanor, her way of being shifts to not knowing as much because she may not have done it for 10, 15, 20 years. So I think the biggest mistake that I always want to like shake women about is that there's so many transferable skills that they don't even realize that are transferable and of value, whether you're investing in real estate, regardless of niche, that they can use and that they really need to um, own and share and not dim. And I think that's a huge mistake. If I can fix one thing, that would be the mistake. That would be the miss. Because when women really own what they do well, because she's working with customers, hundreds and hundreds of customers who trust, like, and respect her to send, you know, to send to send people to her business, and she's concerned about raising capital, right? We're talking about the same sort of trust level, right? And different businesses, but still has the same kind of core skill of being trustworthy and doing what you say you're going to do, et cetera. And I just think women often don't realize the connection just because they may not have all this experience in Airbnb or I shouldn't say Airbnb, short-term rentals or construction doesn't necessarily mean they can't be effective in it and use their past skills and experience on some level to the business. Um, that's a huge miss.
So interesting. It's interesting because obviously work within the real estate industry, but my original career is within human resources, and so a lot of
Okay.
that is like coaching employees, and I feel like that is like something just like across the board is like I don't know if I can do this, or I have a sense of imposter syndrome, and it's like showing them their own mirror and saying, you are doing it in so many different ways. But it's really interesting to hear that and the context of real estate. It makes sense.
One quick story. I went to a conference once, and you love conferences because people come up to you. It wasn't my conference. It was another organization's conference, but I had somebody come up to me, and this was like literally in the same day. And I'm not making this up. I had a gentleman come up to me, and he's like, "Thank you so much for speaking." I forgot what I spoke about, and I said, "No, no problem. What did you get from it?" I had a nice conversation with him, and I said, "What are you involved in? Like, what are you up to?" He's like, "I'm killing it, doing great." I said, "That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that." And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "How, are you do you own rentals? Or are you doing flips? Because I am killing it. I have 5 rental properties." I said, "That's awesome." He's like, "Yeah, I really am. I just can't believe how well I'm doing." I said, I love your confidence. What am I going to say? I'm like, "That's great. Have a great day." We had a little banter. Later in the day, I was chatting with a woman. Her and I met each other at lunch, and I said the same thing to her. She said the same thing to me. "Hey, thanks so much. I love InvestHER. Love what you're doing." I said, "That's awesome. And thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. We work really hard to support women." I said, "What are you involved in?" She's like, "Oh, I'm just getting started." I said, "Well, what are you involved in? Like, you're just getting started, but in what?" She goes, I own 5 rentals, and I'm really just getting started." So, and that's a true story, Alyssa. I wish I was making that up. It's not made up. One thinks they're the real estate mogul because they own 5 properties, right? They're killing it. Those are the words he used. I'm not making that up. And the other one feels like they're just getting started. I'm not making that up. So, perception's in the eye of the beholder. And now, if I polled women and men, would they see and have the same demeanor? In general, women undersell themselves. They do. And the women that I interact with and I have the honor to coach and support are like beyond like amazing. Beyond. I really beyond. Not only are they managing a household and kids, they're building businesses, they're building property. I mean, really. And so I don't want to dismiss anyone. I think, men and women bring so much to the table, of course. But that way of being, he could keep saying he's killing it, but I want women to really own what they do well, especially with other people. Cause now if I'm raising capital and I say I'm getting started, Alyssa, I'm going to come across what? I'm getting started. Do you want to lend to me? Well, you're not getting started. You have 5 properties, right? So I say all that because it's not something I see once in a while. I see it often, and it may not be indicative to real estate investing. It could be other areas. Women can accomplish more and do more than that I've ever seen because I interact with these women and they're really truly amazing and inspiring, and just juggernauts, right? And I want to hear women not boasting, right, but just saying what they can do. That's really important, especially when you're enrolling partners in money, enrolling other people. You got to believe in what you're doing. That's a critical part, right? So anyway, I say all that because we don't want to undersell. I don't want to see women, especially, underselling themselves. Anyone, but certainly women.
Totally. And I almost feel like it's an untraining. Like, I don't know if things
It
are
is a
evolving
training.
for sure, but
I
there's like,
think it's a conditional. I think it's something's in the societal. And again, we're recording this in the United States. I can't speak for every country, but I do think there is a level of conditioning in societal norms and ways of being that is very subtle, but it begins when kids are young to when they get older. It's not something that gets started when we're women. I don't think so. I completely agree.
oh,
I don't have all
100%.
the research around that, but I just from anecdotally, I see it even with my daughter or my son and kids their ages, right? 9 and 12. My daughter, I tell her she could do anything. Now she's like, I don't know, she's going to be I'm not sure what she'll be running. She'll be running something when she's older, probably running me down, but that's okay because she's like, I'm amazing, mom. I'm like, I know, honey, I know. Like, oh, have I told her that too many times? She's like the opposite now, but I've been mindful, right? And of course, conditioning, right? It's important.
I guess in terms of, women getting into real estate, um, often I hear, and this might just be my experience, that many folks are chasing a number. They're like, I want to get
Yeah.
to X number and so on. What does that look like when someone doesn't chase a number? And have you found that it's more powerful or yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like there's so many groups out there, networking groups, real estate related groups that, especially social media, is all about how big, how many doors um, have you acquired? And honestly, it really doesn't mean anything. And this is someone who, again, my experience, right? We have properties in 6 states. Um, we've had close to 2,000 units under management and control. So this is coming from someone who owns quite a bit, not solely, but with others, right? I don't think that messaging is useful or helpful for people to achieve the goals that they actually want to achieve. Because at the end of the day, what matters? What matters is, where am I headed? Right? What is my North Star? Like, what does success look like to me? Is it a number? Is it a lifestyle? The big thing we always talk to the women, especially, during the conference that we're about to have, right? Investor Con. One of the things we always talk about is paint the picture of like, what does financial freedom mean to you, right? What does it look like to you? And sure, there's some specificness around a number. However, there's a lifestyle, there's a time freedom. Um, all of that means something. And then you say, okay, where am I? Where do I want to go? And then what are some paths to get there? It doesn't necessarily mean more is better, or shifting. If you have a few rental properties in a particular market and then someone's like, yeah, now I want to go do this in a new market, in a new asset class with a new team. Okay, doesn't mean you can't do that, but there's risks to all those things when you shift one lever. So the question is more about what do you want and need? How's real estate going to help you get to your goals versus real estate being the goal, right? I love real estate. I think it's a phenomenal asset class. However, it's all about what the vehicle is going to do for you in your life and for your legacy, in my opinion, versus it being about, well, I own this amount of doors. Um, I don't think that's the point. I don't think that's the relevance. And it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. I know people who own very few properties and doing just fine. They're doing great, actually. So the number doesn't matter as much as does it align with you and your goals and where you're headed with your season of life that you're in. Some people are in the hustle mode. Some people are in the preservation mode, right? We're all in different stages depending on age, interest, lifestyle. So there's not one recipe. And I think anyone who teaches that there is teaching their recipe. They're teaching the way they became whatever they are. And I don't believe there is one way. And that's something we really teach at InvestHER is that, what does it look like to you? And how do you work backwards based on your life, based on what you're looking to achieve, and based on, quite honestly, what you're willing to do? Some people don't want to do much. Well, active versus passive, right? That may make difference. So that's my answer to that. I don't think it means as much as people make it. It really doesn't matter. It's about what you're actually owning, what you're earning, what you're doing, how your time is being spent, and is it moving you towards what you want?
That makes sense to me. Um, and I imagine it keeps you close to your growth and staying in touch with, what your success is. Because if you're chasing a number, you might wake up one day and say, like, what am I doing this for? But basically what you're saying, I think makes perfect sense. You know exactly what you're doing it for because that's where you started. Um,
It's the intentionality, I think, is the part that honestly I think people miss in their life, let alone with their investing strategies, right? I think that level of intentionality, it takes mindfulness, it takes awareness. And we don't learn that. We're like all about, especially for like very driven women, which we attract, and we have a lot of driven women in our community. We learn very early, just work really hard and keep moving, keep making it happen. And then you're like, you take a moment, you're like, is this what I want? And that's a question a lot of women are asking, literally in real time. It's like, is this really what I want? Full time, part time. Is this the business I want? Is this the life I want? Um, and those are really important questions to ask continually. Maybe not every day. That could be a little intense, but certainly at pivotal moments and quarterly. I do a weekly check-in with myself. I call it like the state of the union. And I just take a moment on Saturday mornings before my kids are up. And I just kind of like look at my life, not just my investments, but my life, and saying what's working, what's not working. What do I want more of? What do I want less of? And that's intentionality, right? That's intentionality of my life, let alone how am I investing and where is my business going? Um, no one's going to answer those questions for you, but you need to kind of like, in order to steer the trip, right? Steer the ship, excuse me, those questions, because you'll steer it any way you want. You'll hear a new strategy or a new this or a new that, or hear a podcast, and then you're like, hold on, I want to do that. Like, is this aligned? Is this really aligned with what I want? Those are the questions that I think are the deeper work that people just don't ask until they're forced to, right? Until they're actually like literally forced to. And that's when they ask those questions. I'd rather see people asking those questions, not when they're forced to because of a illness or reason to ask those questions, but because it's a weekly basis. They're just making sure what they're doing is moving them towards what they want in the way they want it.
yeah, what incredible advice. It's interesting too, looping back to the underselling yourself.
Yeah.
I think intention too, like that quality, think about building a business, having intention behind the decisions you make and how you build, I think, inherently will make anything more scalable or more, you know, honestly like successful. So it's like a very transferable quality within it. It's awesome. So there's a massive transfer of wealth happening right now. How does that show up in the conversations you've been having in InvestHER? And how are women thinking about and directing their capital?
Yeah, and and some people some people are aware of it, and some people are not aware of it. So just to give some context, right? There it's said within the next, I guess, 5 years, 80 to 84 trillion dollars are getting passed in terms of wealth transfer from the baby boomers, and in particular in the hands of women. Now, people are saying, okay, why women? Women already control wealth. However, it's increasing significantly for a lot of reasons. Number one, statistically, right, women are making more money, not more than ever on their own accord versus, relying on anyone or anything. Um, and a lot of them are facing two inheritances, one being a death of a spouse. Again, baby boomers, right, transferring wealth, baby boomers getting older, as well as inheritance of parents that are passing on. And so what you're seeing is this unprecedented amount of wealth that's going to be in the hands of women particularly. And what's interesting there, right, is that women, especially what we see, um, they are smart investors. Especially with real estate, they mitigate risk, they ask questions, they do their due diligence, and now more than ever, the events that I go to with wealth and women, women are really intrigued to learn more about how they can be directing some of their wealth directly to real estate, whether it's actively, right, buying a rental property or passively investing, into a diversified fund or what have you. There's so many different ways to actively and passively invest in real estate, not just one way. And so the women that are savvy, accredited investors that are coming into to wealth, they're why am I just handing all my wealth over to, no offense, a financial planner? I think financial planners have a place in our financial landscape. Of course, I work with one. I think they could add a lot of great value. But to say that women don't have the ability to direct any of their money into any investment vehicle is nonsense. I think women are much smarter than that, actually. And especially when it comes to real estate, they have an interest. It's tangible. It's a very old alternative investment that they can get their eyes and ears around. Again, there's cons and pros to all investments. I don't mean to say that real estate only has pros. I could share plenty of cons. However, I do see what I'm super passionate about, and what Andres and I are really passionate about at InvestHER, is that women are directing their capital so they can grow wealth on their own terms and take more control of their financial future versus just trusting a third entity to do all the doing for you. I'm not saying not have team members. I think it makes complete sense to have team members. I do think it's not should I invest in real estate, but at what level should real estate play in my wealth building strategies? And how active or passive do I want to be? Um, I do believe that wholeheartedly that as women are getting, coming into more wealth, that them asking those questions makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot more benefit to that than just um, directing it over to someone. Nothing against that, of course, as long as they're maybe investing in real estate. But I do see real estate as part of someone's portfolio. And it hasn't gotten a lot of attention at times from different people, different financial planners. I think it depends on how people get paid. Quite honestly, we tend to promote things we get paid on. I hate to say that, but that is the truth. I have no attachment to what women do with their money, except that they build their wealth and take control of their financial future. And I do see real estate being a really healthy way to do that in some capacity for their wealth building strategies. I do believe that. So that's what I stand on. And women usually make the right calls. They do the due diligence, whether again it's active or passive.
I mean, that makes sense. And I guess, for for the folks that you've seen overcome, I feel like there is, a feeling of a barrier to entry. Although it may not be there,
Yeah.
there's a feeling of that barrier to entry, especially around, mentioning the intentional piece. I think from what I've seen, the way that women invest versus the way that others may invest is a little bit different. I don't know if it's risk aversity, but maybe just wanting to understand their investments more or being, more informed about it. What have you seen like the most successful ways to kind of one have exposure into industries like this, or whether it's passive or active?
Absolutely. I mean, we see it because we have women who we have a free assessment on our website, and we have women complete it, and it usually gives a few different right scenarios. And you have women who really are constrained. They don't want to spend a lot of time, and they often think, if I invest in real estate, I need to make this my full-time job. I need to become a landlord. I need to like turn my life over and give my whole life to this. That can't be the furthest from the truth. Yes. If you want to be an active landlord, you need to put processes and systems in place. And I'm not saying that that's not the case. There's customers in real estate, right? Tenants, residents, whether they're short term, whether they're long term, whether they're a commercial tenant, there's people renting your space out on some level and on some level, some amount of time, unless you go down the fix and flip route, which is more of a short term gain, not necessarily long term, wealth building could be part of your wealth building strategy. But let's just take rentals for a moment. Um, so that's one scenario. And then yes, that's one scenario. And there's a passive scenario where somebody is investing in multifamily and they can potentially passively invest with a group who has $400 million under management. I'm not talking, companies that are small. I'm talking about really legit, companies that have thousands of investors. So there's different scenarios. Some people think, oh, it's not liquid. Well, some funds you can get your money back in a year. Some people think it's really really a lot of money. You need at least 100 grand. Well, some projects are 10 grand. So there's so many different scenarios that are lower barrier to entry. The beautiful part and the tough part, and honestly, the reason why I think people get stopped is that real estate doesn't mean one thing. I mean, literally, you could take residential and commercial, and then we can get into all the specifics of the delineation of I mean, residential is not overly complex, right? You got single family, you got multifamily. Then you go commercial, though, and there's a whole other world, right? From warehouse to retail to even call multifamily because it is considered on a commercial sense. Um, Self storage, mobile home park. I mean, I can keep going, right? We can keep
Right.
going with all the different quote unquote niches. So when people see that, they get very overwhelmed and then they stop. And then they're like, okay, that was easier. Let me just go do that. Let me just go press the easy button. But I do think the barrier to entry is to start to if learn how where your North Star is. I know women who really want to own a property and they have no problem becoming the landlord, right? They have no issues with that. They're excited about it. Now they have to put processes in place and have good X, Y, and Z, but it's not rocket science, right? Other women are like, I'm in a season, I have no interest in that, right? And they put up another structure. So I love that real estate actually has something for everyone, depending on the time, money, illiquidity, and goals that you have. It's just a matter of being around other people doing it that could actually give you good, useful knowledge and information. That's what I honestly love about InvestHER because there are literally women doing all those things, active, passive, and then delineating in the passive route, delineating in the active route. We have women who are doing a strategy called co-living where they're renting out by the room. And I had a woman speak about that. Is that for every person buying property? Probably not. Is that a strategy that's working right now? It is. So I say that all, Alyssa, because the choices of over could get people overwhelmed and then they stop versus being around people that you can connect with and say, okay, you're doing this strategy. What's really going on? And how do I potentially win in that and align it with my goals? That's why our community exists. So the barrier to entry can be decreased, right? Because you're not going to know everything about self storage if you are intrigued by self storage. That's why you need to know people who do and start to build relationships with those people. And like my knowledge becomes your knowledge becomes my knowledge. The fallacy that women are going to know everything about everything in this particular business, never. I don't think
Right.
you'll ever get to that point because there's so many different elements of it. There's so many different niches. I don't know everything about self storage. I know a lot about multifamily because that's most of my portfolio. But if someone said, "Should I invest in self storage?" I'd say, "Go talk to X, Y, and Z." I'd have three people to recommend to them because I wouldn't be able to direct them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, and I won't keep you forever. just a few more questions for you. I'm really curious about, you know, as your portfolio scaled, or maybe you've seen, how's like your relationship with debt and outside capital evolved?
Mm.
Because that's something that's scary, right? Even the word debt is scary, but interested in how your relationship has changed.
Yeah, I think my husband and I grew our portfolio by raising capital of our own as well as other people's, whether that's more in a debt position like a private lender on a project that makes sense, or in equity, right, where you're actually raising capital in a syndication. Um, you have the private capital, and then you have obviously institutional, right, where um, debt has you have debt on a property, you have a mortgage on a property. Um, it all matters. I think the critical part in this business is, you always say there's good debt and bad debt. And I do believe there is good debt and bad debt, right? Um, mortgage could be considered good debt. Some people may think it's bad debt, depending on if you want to own things free and clear. But I do think in order to grow, smartly leveraging what you have makes sense. Um, it, it's hard to like grow a real estate investing business if you're not going to leverage anything, right? I mean, you could have all your properties free and clear. Um, at some point, would you want to borrow against one that has a lot of equity so you can buy another one? It all depends on what your goals are. I know people who do not want to have a lot of debt, good, bad, anything on their properties. I know other people who are over leveraged, right? Too leveraged and
Right.
don't have enough cash and liquidity to weather storms. That's not good either. So it's all relevant to what your risk tolerance is, and knowing what your risk tolerance is and saying, okay, what are we willing to do in this situation, and how do we protect, especially if private capital is in place and everything in place. So um, I don't think there's one answer. I do think though, like good debt versus bad debt. Rich Dad talks about that, right? Rabbi Kisawi talks about that. Is an understanding that I think is important. However, I think people can be over leveraged as well, especially right now. Um, I don't think that's smart either. And I'm more conservative with my underwriting. I'm more conservative with the debt and lines of credit, or what we have that are being put to work, how they're getting paid back, what's what's conservative, what's not. All of it matters right now. Where are you getting cash? If how much cash reserves do you have by project, by business? I mean, um, I think a lot of real estate investors don't take debt serious enough, and they are not conservative enough, to be honest. And then when shit hits the fan, they have nothing to rely on, and they can get into trouble. So um, and on the other hand, people don't get in because they're so overwhelmed by debt that they're like, I don't want to have any of that and be worried about making a mortgage payment. So it's somewhere in the middle, right? I think, and it all has to do with risk tolerance and what your money story is, and what are you willing to move through. I can't tell what someone's risk tolerance is. You just need to know what it is, and is it going to align with where you want to be? I mean, if you want to build a big business and build a big portfolio, you're going to have to deal with debt unless you have been endowed, a lot of money that you'll buy everything free and clear. Then Godspeed, right? Just depends on your goals and what you have access to.
Totally. And partially is what you were like sharing. It's like one of our underwriters' dreams. We want people who like understand their debt and don't over leverage and so
Especially right now. I mean, I've been at this a long time, and like I said, we took on a large luxury flip that we're doing in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and it's a really large project, right? The largest price tag we'll be selling that we've ever sold, me and my husband. Um, However, I did a lot of due diligence, supply and demand, and the need for a property like this, and who my customer is, and what our pricing is, and if this goes over time, and what's our worst case scenario? What's our worst case scenario? Like going back literally, what our worst case scenario is. So I think that is a conversation. If you are doing well in this business right now and you're making good calls, you're really thinking that way. It's not like if everything works out, you just can't underwrite. And I don't think you could do that in today's landscape. You probably could have years ago, Um, Not now. It won't work. It just won't work unless I don't know, unless you're living in a place that I don't know about, but anywhere that the women are investing across the country, people are being really smart and being really mindful and conservative, but but taking chance, right? Doing things that are also you don't want to just like hide in a room and just like my cash will grow without me doing anything, right? That doesn't work either. I don't know. That would be really cool if it did, but so I think it's mindful and intentional risk right now and being really smart and conservative and surrounding yourself with other people who are doing it. Um, it's hard to do this in a vacuum. That's why we believe in the community we're building.
It's awesome. Um, all right. Well, kind of to wrap it up, is there anything that, we haven't talked about that you want to share with the audience? And also, tell us, anything more
Yeah.
about InvestHER and so on.
Yeah. I really want to say that what I've seen is that when people are trying to figure something out themselves, we become really reliant on ourselves. And especially women, they get a lot done. I mean, I could get a lot done. There's no question. However, when I rely on myself to solve a problem, it takes me longer and it costs me more mental energy. So that is exactly why we've built InvestHER, and especially why we literally have InvestHER Con. It's a 2.5 day conference every year. ABL is one of our premier sponsors. Um, we have that conference because it's a way for women to stop doing things alone. Whether you have zero properties or five plus, or you're growing a real estate investing portfolio, actively, passively, this is the room to be in to grow your wealth through real estate and to really be around other women doing it, not like talking about it or wishing they were doing it. Last year, we had 1.95 billion of assets under management in our room. Really proud of that. Over a few hundred women, right? That's a really impressive number. So that is what you get when you come to our conference because everyone has something to give, everyone has something to get, transferable skills, and that's what makes the conference so beautiful. So I would invite the women and even the men listening, invite the women in your life, June 14th to the 16th. It's in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it's a transformational experience, not just a conference. It's a way for women to really create a plan, get a support system so they can move through whatever they're moving through so they can take control, right, of their financial future. Real estate being one strategy, but we're going to be talking about a lot of different topics at the conference, from partnership to hormones to estate planning to financial planning to core real estate investing topics, as well as AI and all the things that are happening, fast moving, right? So that's what you could expect. But I would invite all the women and the men listening, get to our conference because that is what we've done that for. So you don't have to figure things out in a silo.
That's awesome. Well, and I actually have attended your conferences. I intend to attend them in the future. They're incredible. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much for today and, all of this information. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.